To call our modern prison system outdated would be a gross understatement of how underdeveloped we are when it comes to incarceration. Prisoners have a very, very hard time reintegrating into society, and we think of prisoners as just that, prisoners. What we fail to realize is that prisoners are almost always American citizens that are down on their luck and have some problems that they need to reassess and they need help. But we dehumanize them and we, at every single turn, try to abuse them as much as possible. The prison system in the US is incredibly outdated. It's incredibly poor for recidivism rates, and it does not teach the skills that they need to reintegrate into communities. We're going to talk about how modern prisons are evil and are disgusting and abuse American citizens every single day. First of all, we're going to talk about private prisons. Why the hell do private prisons exist? Why are we allowing people, corporations, and companies profit off of Americans who were incarcerated and stripped of their rights? That seems like an abuse. The way these prisons make money is they bid for government contracts to house prisoners that are either overflowing from the federal or state system, and they usually have a minimum quota to keep prisoners in there. To do this, they do many different things like adding charges, trying to create situations where a potential riot could occur, and there's just a lot of nefarious, shady things that happen in American prisons, which is not news to anybody. This is very common knowledge. But the fact that we let private companies profit off of these American citizens, it's pretty brutal. And a lot of people, they like to think of prisoners as, oh, you broke the law, then you got to go do the time. Most American prisoners that are arrested every single year, by the way, are arrested on drug offenses, which, yes, it is bad to do drugs. It's bad to sell drugs. The problem is that most of these people have never had drug convictions before. A lot of these people, this is their first time drug conviction. And what a drug problem signals to me is not corporal punishment is needed. It's more that mental services are needed more. A lot of these people, when you hear prison stories, yes, it's of their own retelling, but they often talk about how, they got divorced or they lost their kids, they had a gambling problem, they lost their house, and they turned to drugs, they got arrested, now they're there, and now they're in a vicious cycle of recidivism. All recidivism means is the rate that people go back into the prison system. We have one of the highest in the world. I'll get into that a little bit later. But next we're going to talk about slave labor. In Angola, the Louisiana State Penitentiary, we have prisoners picking cotton for cents an hour. Not like 20 or 30 cents an hour, like 6 or 7 cents an hour. That's pretty brutal. That's pretty disgusting. And they honestly have no choice. They are punished if they don't go out to the field and pick cotton, which I don't know about you, but I feel like a couple hundred years ago, we kind of fought against slave labor, but it's incredibly profitable for the US economy. So we tend to kind of ignore this, and people don't even really know about that. But yeah, we have people picking cotton for about 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 cents an hour. That's pretty bad. That sounds like an abusive system to me. Nonetheless, we have extremely high recidivism rates for a first world country. Now, there are countries with higher recidivism rates, which is alarming to me. But yes, we are a first world country and we have nearly the highest incarceration rate of any first world country in the modern world. As developed and as rich as the US is, it seems like we should be focusing on trying to reintegrate these individuals into society rather than administering corporal punishment at every single turn. It just seems like that to me, but a lot of people disagree. They think if you do the crime, you gotta do the time. Now, if your crime is petty drug offenses and you get 5 years for that, then I guess that's the time you're supposed to get. Maybe if it's your first offense, hopefully the judge is lenient on you, but if the judge had a bad day or a bad lunch, there you are in prison and now you have to fight for your life every single day. It's a pretty horrid system, but we've let it go on and we've left it almost completely unchanged since the 1990s, which is pretty alarming. In the 80s, we actually had a very big change in the prison system. They actively made it worse. They removed the the opportunity for higher education to happen. They removed any incentives, most incentives to get out early. They slashed government programs to help people reintegrate into society. We made prison life actively worse. And we started allowing a lot more private prisons to start popping up because of the war on drugs and the booming prison population. Now, I am not a former prisoner, nor do I want to go to prison, and nor do I do anything that would land me there. But I do care about my community, and so should you. Community is very important, and a lot of these prisoners get released back into their former communities. And if the only thing you're learning how to do in prison is to commit crime better and more effectively, I don't think that's going to be a very good nor valuable community member to add back into your town. But we don't care here. We just want to see these people rot in jail, and we never want to see them again. The problem is that most of these people are normal American citizens and were normal American citizens at one point or another, and we don't want to see them succeed and come back into society. Yes, I'm aware there are violent prisoners in there, and that there are people who commit murder, and they are rightfully punished. A lot of them get life in prison, which some countries don't even offer. But we give them life in prison, and that's fine. But people with petty drug offenses are stuck in a horrible cycle due to the terrible, terrible regulations and terrible rights we have for formerly incarcerated people. Next would be harsh drug enforcement and low mental health programs. We have an astonishingly low amount of mental health programs. We don't really offer mental health even for normal citizens, regardless of drug offenses nor anything. But I feel like people who are in prison probably need it more than people who have never been to prison. I'm not saying that they deserve it more, but they are definitely crying out for help for it. I think mental health is important, and I think that mental health for every person is important. But I think prisoners probably to reintegrate in society need a little bit more help, but we don't offer that anymore. We actively remove these programs from prisons to keep profitability as high as possible, because that doesn't lead to lower recidivism rates. That actually improves recidivism rates by lowering the chances that someone else goes back into prison by helping them deal with their mental struggles. Next would be no higher education opportunities. Now, I'm not saying you can't get your GED, but that is not higher education. That is the baseline education. There are plenty of prisons. Almost every prison offers GED programs, and that's a good thing. But I think what these prisoners need are a bit more education, because if you didn't know, as a felon, it's incredibly hard to get new employment. And there are very, very harsh probation restrictions to get new employment, and they incentivize you. Well, they punish you if you don't get it within like the first couple months of being released from prison. But if you've ever filled out a job application, they always ask you, are you or have you ever been formerly incarcerated in the past 5 years? Do you have a felony? Now, this isn't really grounds to not hire someone, but if an employer sees that, there might be incentive to be like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't. And if no one talks about it, then it's technically not discrimination. It's just you were moved on, and we just didn't think you were a good fit for the company. There's nothing wrong with that. If you are a felon, yes, it's going to be harder for you to get a job. But if you're a felon with a welding certification, if you're a felon with an engineering degree, now you actually have a fighting chance, and you are actually able to get employment. And you're actually able to make a good living, so you don't have to continue to do crime to make ends meet. That is what we fail to realize. All these people want to do is make ends meet. Sometimes, yes, they just go back to the same hood, or they go back to the same area and do the same thing that they were doing. And those people are rightfully incarcerated. But some people actually want to do better, but it's astonishingly hard to do so when the opportunities that are given to you are taken away at every single turn due to the past actions of yourself. I'm not advocating to free all prisoners, house all prisoners, but I am advocating for better reintroduction into society. There are plenty of other countries that do this way better than the US. Now, there is a radical country that does this, which is Norway. Norway, we see as their prison system completely radical. And I understand that. Compared to our prison system, it is night and day difference. I'm not advocating for that prison system either, because they are notoriously a very high trust society. We are a fairly medium trust society. there are harsh penalties, but there's also a fair amount of crime in the US. And not just crime, violent crime as well. So Norway obviously has a different society. They have different measures for how they deal with crime, but they do have low recidivism rates and they do have a different prison style. That's why their 5-year recidivism rate is about 25%. Our 5-year recidivism rate is 70 to 80%. That's pretty bad. That is not a good thing. That means that the people who leave prison tend to go back. Now, why they go back, we don't really know. It's all case by case, but it doesn't seem like it's just a person-to-person problem. This almost seems like a systemic problem. So if we don't change the system, nothing changes. I'm not saying to let prisoners get master's degree for free when people can't even get that, but maybe offer them some classes on welding. Maybe offer them some classes on engineering. Maybe offer them some classes on mechanics. How does a car work? How can you fix and repair cars? So they can probably actually get help and go somewhere after they're gone. So they can seek employment in these blue-collar jobs that are notoriously starting to become not just almost completely gone, but we have a very, very serious labor shortage in the US when it comes to these blue-collar jobs. Now, Gen Z is actually picking up a lot more of these blue-collar jobs, but prisoners could also benefit from these environments and jobs because they are high-paying and they are very useful to society. So we did talk about the discrimination against felons, but it's a bit more severe than people actually discuss. So the discrimination against felons not only extends to employment, but also housing. You are probably not going to be able to apply and get into a community with an HOA. Now, that's understandable, but that applies to almost every felony, regardless if it's a drug offense. So, for example, if you were trafficking drugs, that's a felony. If you had possession of maybe an ounce of marijuana in Louisiana, that's a felony. So you are not able to go into a nice community with an HOA. They can deny you based on your previous incarceration status, which is fine, I guess. But the problem with that is you are now kind of forced to move into undesirable areas where your status as a felon will be kind of perpetuated and you will be around other people who have statuses as felons. It's kind of almost like a redlining scenario. So if you make one mistake, you are almost never ever able to climb back out of that hole. Now you can buy somewhere without an HOA, but that's not going to give you the time, freedom that you possibly need to be able to work a bit harder than everyone else because of your former mistakes. There is a lot that goes on in this country, and we incentivize the profit of prison systems that continually happens. Unfortunately, it's been a systemic problem for most of U.S. history, but as of recently, it has not gotten any better. And like I said, since the 1990s, it's been left virtually unchanged. If you like what you saw, subscribe. Thanks for watching. See ya.